So I come from the Hindu tradition. I regard myself as a practitioner of this tradition. But my story as a Hindu is a little bit different from the stories of the majority of Hindus who live in the United States or other parts of the Western world. I was not born in India. I was born in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, a small island just off the coast of Venezuela. My great-grandfather got on a boat in the middle of the 19th century from the port of Kolkata down the eastern coast of India, around the Cape of Good Hope and up to the Atlantic, to Trinidad and Tobago. This was right in the middle of the 19th century. The slave trade was abolished. The British plantation system was in crisis, and they were looking to recruit alternative labor to resuscitate the sugarcane plantation. So India, which was, especially North India, sugarcane was grown, people had skills, and it was a time of great poverty. So they recruited young men to come and work in the sugar plantation. So this was pre-partition India. So Hindus and Muslims, young men came to the island of Trinidad. It was the same wave that took Indians particularly from North India, some from South India, to South Africa, to Mauritius, to Fiji, and other places where they are now thriving communities. So I grew up there. My great-grandfather and my grandfathers, in addition to their work as, first of all, as laborers on the sugar plantations, but then as small farmers, landowners, were also serving the communities as priests, as Hindu ritual specialists. So I grew up in a very orthodox Hindu home, deeply informed by religion. And I wanted then to immerse myself in the study of the Hindu tradition. So after my undergraduate studies, I immediately set off for India. Very few people were traveling back to India at that time. This was in the early 1970s. I went to India and I joined a Hindu monastery. And I lived and studied in the monastery for 3 years. It was a very ascetic lifestyle for me. Our days would start pre-dawn with worship, traditional worship in the temple, a cup of tea afterwards, classes on the sacred texts, language classes in Sanskrit. Lunch was the first meal, one of 2 meals a day. Classes on afternoons, worship in the temple again on evenings, and then dinner. I lost 40 pounds in 6 months because of the rigorous lifestyle. But I can say it was the most important experience, formative experience in my life. I found a very traditional, compassionate, committed teacher who was an ocean of patience and who taught with great love these sacred texts each day. So at the end of 3 years, I had a choice to make. I could then take the next steps to becoming a Hindu monk, as most of my fellow students did, or I could consider alternative possibilities. I remember, and I'm not sure why I did it, Matt, but before I went to the ashram, I remember writing to this teacher and saying, I would like to come and study with you, but you must allow me not to make any commitment at this before I come. I'm not going to. I don't want to join an organization to which you belong. I just want to come and study with you, but I must be free to decide what to do at the end of it. So I chose at that time, because I was very young. By the time I had finished my studies, I was about 24 years old. And I didn't have the opportunity to study religion academically or as a scholar. My undergraduate studies was not in religion. We didn't have a religion department at the university where I studied. So I was feeling that I needed to immerse myself in the academic study of religion. So I went back to university, this time in the United Kingdom, and I took every imaginable course that was available. Sociology of religion, psychology of religion. I was not registered, but I went to all of the courses on Christian history and theology that was taught by Robert Jenkins. I remember his name. And I also went to the courses on Islam, on Islamic mysticism, because I wanted to see, what I had studied so intensely and so deeply for 3 years, where did it fit in the world of scholarship and academic study, and where did it fit also in the world of the study of other religious traditions. So, those two experiences, the monastic training that I had, as well as the academic training, still flow in me, sometimes in deep tension, but sometimes they both illumine and nurture. But I want to mention 2 unexpected experiences that I had when I was a student that really shaped me decisively. And this will also, I think, connect with, I want to make a connection with Gandhi. So first of all, I received an invitation while I was still in graduate school to attend an interreligious dialogue meeting in India. And Professor Matt mentioned my interest in dialogue. This was in a small North Indian village, Himalayan village called Rajpur. And the topic was religious resources for a just society, a Hindu-Christian dialogue. And this was my first introduction to organized, systematic, interreligious dialogue. So a group of Hindus and Christians, most of the Hindus came from South Asia, Sri Lanka, India, but the Christians came from all around the world. And in this small setting, this small village, we stayed together for a week and talked intensively about the relationship between religious beliefs and practice and justice. And I must confess to you that 3 years of monastic studies in India, and I just embarked on my graduate studies, I never gave thought, nor did any of my teachers, I must say, talked about or discussed religion and justice, or the relationship between religion and social reality, social structures. And that meeting ignited so many questions in me, pushed me to think deeply about my studies in a monastery and how all of the textual work that I did on the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and other texts related to the condition of human existence in society. It was my first introduction to Christian social ethics, particularly Catholic social ethics, because there were Catholic theologians there who were talking about social ethics. It was an entirely new field to me. So the encounter with Christian reflection on matters of justice and Catholic social ethics really opened my eyes and turned me back in a different way to reflecting on in my own tradition, and decisively influenced both the life that I would lead, but the kind of scholarship that I would do in the Hindu tradition. I think the culmination of it all was my book published a few years ago, which is the first systematic Hindu theology of liberation. The book is titled The Hindu Theology of Liberation, which really had its birth in that meeting in Rajpur and many subsequent meetings. The second experience that I had was perhaps a little more interesting and exciting. I think it came about perhaps through the Rajpur meeting. I was invited, again, still a graduate student, to a meeting just outside of London. And I was told that I should keep the location of this meeting secret. We want you to come to this meeting. And the title was the first international interfaith meeting on apartheid. It was in 1984. But it's going to be a private, secretive, the location should be kept secret. And the meeting came from a man by the name of Bishop Trevor Huddleston. You probably would never have not heard of Bishop Trevor Huddleston. He was an Anglican priest from the UK who settled in South Africa and became one of the most well-known campaigners against the system of apartheid in South Africa. He had to leave South Africa because of fear for his life, and he moved back to the United Kingdom and founded the anti-apartheid society movement. He invited me. And it was in collaboration between Huddleston and the United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid. So I went to this meeting. There were Africans from South Africa, from Namibia, some of them, I remember, Muslim, Hindu, talking about apartheid and also talking about the role of the Christian church, especially the Dutch Reformed Church, in legitimizing and justifying how apartheid also was justified by appeals to religion. And that, again, like Rajpur, I started to think more deeply about matters of caste in the Hindu tradition and the way in which, religion was appealed to legitimize social hierarchies and social structures. On the last day of the meeting, I realized why we were all sworn to secrecy about the location. Because we were told that on that day, we had a special guest. And then the doors opened. Armed guards came in, very dramatic, and they were followed. I'm not sure. I mean, you're all very young, but they were followed by an South African leader whose name is Oliver Tambo. Oliver Tambo. In South Africa, all of the leaders were imprisoned, including Nelson Mandela and everyone else. Tambo was the African National Congress leader who had fled South Africa, was living in exile and keeping this movement alive. So he was, the arms of the South African government are long and wide, so he was a target, a constant target. So his presence at that meeting would have, if it wasn't kept secret, would have been very risky to him. And I remember his address to this day. He delivered such an impassionate call to people of religion to use their moral voice, to use their moral reach to speak out against the system of apartheid. And I think that meeting really launched the interfaith resistance, the international interfaith resistance to apartheid. Of course, Gandhi had a long history in South Africa, as you would have read. He spent about 25 years of his life in South Africa. In his own way, there are controversies about it. In his own way, he was also experiencing and struggling against the system of apartheid. So my own work, especially I mentioned these two significant events that shaped me when I was in graduate school, led my scholarship to take a very different kind of turn. And so my interests in interreligious dialogue have been consistent throughout my life. Friendships that I formed in Rajpur over 40 plus years ago have endured and sustained to this day. Friendship especially with my Christian friends who were all there, and then of course in other ways I grew close to Islamic friends and friends from the Buddhist and other traditions. And in many ways, like Gandhi, because you read how the significance of other religious traditions in his life, especially his encounter with Christianity and with the person of Jesus, who was so deeply influential on Gandhi. My own journey, both as a scholar and as a human being, has been deeply informed and shaped by my relationships with my friends of other religious traditions. I cannot say, in all honesty, how much less of a human being I would be, how much less of a scholar I would be had I not had these friends who have accompanied me on this journey. How much I learned from them about their traditions, but just as important, or even more importantly, how much they have opened my eyes to seeing my own tradition better, both in its beautiful insights, but also in those areas where I need to question. I need to be critical. So I think of myself in relation to my tradition today as a critical lover of my tradition. I walk an interesting razor's edge, but I have many allies in other traditions who help me to do that, and who stand also with me when I need support and affirmation for what I do. As you would have seen in Gandhi would have described himself as, the word he uses, it's a Sanskrit word, Advaita, means not two. He was a very ecumenical type of Hindu, but if you ask him what is the tradition that he identified with, he would say, I identify with the non-dual tradition. The tradition that affirms a fundamental unity at the heart of all existence, the fundamental oneness of existence, which is described by the word Brahman. So Brahman, this ultimate reality, exists in everything, unites everything. So it's a theology of unity. What is interesting about Gandhi, or innovative about Gandhi, if I would say that, is that in the quest for this one, in the search for this one, in the path that many took to find this one, this path involved turning away from society. It was a part of what we will call renunciation, radical renunciation, turning away or moving away from life in community or life in society to find this one. Okay. Gandhi was very ascetic, and we might want to talk about that. But at the same time, he argued that if this one exists in all beings, was present in all, the only way in which I will find this one is through the service of all. By loving all, by serving all, by living in the midst of all. So that led him to a very different way of understanding renunciation. So renunciation was not, as would have been traditionally understood, as renunciation of life and family and community, but for him it meant identifying with all, and in his case it was identifying particularly with those who were were poor, those who were marginalized, those who were outcasts. And the untouchables in India, for example, became a special focus of his concern. So he drew that from his understanding of the meaning of Advaita, the unity that Advaita connoted. Because traditional renunciation in the Hindu tradition, which many who sought the one took, is a really radical renunciation. In fact, if you became a traditional renunciant in Hinduism, I went that path, the final act of initiation into monasticism was to sit and to perform my own funeral ceremony. I would create an effigy of myself and burn that effigy in a fire, and now I am dead to the world. I would give up the ties to my family. I would have a new name. I would, no longer belong to a family, no longer, do traditional work. It was entering a kind of a limbo space. So that to say, like Gandhi, that I am an Advaitin, but to immerse himself in the service of the community was a different step. And I'll end on this point to give you time. I think a second way in which he offered a different interpretation of what it meant for him as an activist is, again, coming back to that theme of unity. He argued as a justification for his activism in politics that life is one, and that you cannot separate humanity's religious life or economic life or political life or social life. Life also is an indissoluble unity. So the unity of life. And so if I affirm religious commitment as he did, because of the unity of life, I must immerse myself. If that is what it takes to serve others, I must immerse myself into the life of politics. I must talk about economics. I must talk about social structures, because life can't be compartmentalized in this way. So these were all very interesting ways in which he was adapting non-dualism to justify his activism. And most importantly, of course, from this teaching of non-duality or unity, he drew the very central ethic of non-injury or ahimsa. Ahimsa comes out of the unity of life. To hurt another is to hurt oneself, because ultimately we are united at the most fundamental level of being. So non-injury was a direct expression for him of this fundamental underlying unity of all life through the one Brahman. This is a word that you have seen, I believe, in Gandhi's writings. This is the word that corresponds to what we're speaking about at non-duality. So literally it means, this is a negative, it means not. Not to. Not to. So what it seeks, the fundamental way in which this is used theologically in the Hindu tradition is the name of one particular tradition that is associated with the great teacher Shankara. So it's one way of describing the relationship between the ultimate reality, Brahman, and the world. And the world, of course, includes, beings. So this is really fascinating. So those who subscribe to this tradition would say that if we had to talk about, and if you want to translate it into the language of God and the world, we can't say that they are two. That would not be appropriate. That would be dualism. In other words, God and the world are not parallel realities. Right? They're not parallel realities, because then, if they were, you would have a reality that in some way exists alongside the divine, and could be construed as a limit on the divine also. So to say that they are two would not be appropriate for that reason, because two is a very dualistic way of speaking about the relationship. So shall we say they are one? Well, that word also is problematic, because if you say they are one, then it undermines or homogenizes the splendid diversity of the world, and the world is right. So I'm talking to you right now. We exist. So we should not say that they are. We should not describe the relationship as one, and we should not, or two. So we have to find another way. So that's why you come to this really interesting, paradoxical, theological, meaningful way of saying they are not two. Maybe that's enough. We can say they are not two. And then we try to work out what does that mean. Spend the rest of our lives trying to understand what it means to say that they are not two. So that's what now. But from that, as you can see, although Gandhi affirmed this truth, he would not say, I'll come to your question, that one choice is as good as another choice, that we can't make judgments. No, we can make moral judgments. We can make moral judgments because this is also affirming a sort of a fundamental unity at the heart of all things, although it would move away from the language of one or the language of two. There are many things, great teachers from the Advaita tradition give many examples, like the relationship between the wave and the water in the ocean. Are they two? Are they one? Or is it something more? How do we describe them? If we say they are one, then why are we calling this wave? Why am I seeing this wave? Why am I not seeing water? I'm seeing a wave. If I say they are two, then I'm denying also the fact that the water has this. It is formed out of the wave. It is sustained by the wave. It returns to the wave. Its very being is the very being of the wave comes from the water. So you find a different way to speak of it. But we could make moral judgments. All actions, all choices are not the same. We have to remember, Gandhi, when he was developing this philosophy of nonviolence, he was struggling also with how should I call it. And there were many English terms that he was familiar with. So, for example, people were talking about passive resistance, which he didn't like. Because he says, there's nothing passive about the method that I am advocating. So after a long search, he came up with the term, I believe you would have encountered this also in your reading. He coined the term Satyagraha. And it's important why he called it like that, because your question is really to that. Agraha means to resist, to oppose, resistance. But Satya means truth. So truth resistance, the force of truth, sometimes he would speak of it, but truth resistance. But we shouldn't forget that that his whole method was conceived as a way of, as you said, of resisting. Right? But because he held so firmly, and this word truth had many meanings for him. And it's a very ancient, as you can see, multi-level ways in which he is using it. And sometimes it depends on if he is using it to the uppercase or the lowercase. So lowercase s, lowercase satya, satya, would mean for him, speaking truth, not telling lies. But when he uses the uppercase Satyagraha, truth, because you have seen in your reading also where he talks about the fact that he used to speak of God as truth, and then he changed, he reversed, and he says, no, truth is God. And he has long exegesis on why he made that reversal. So when he uses it with the uppercase S, he's speaking about the ultimate divine reality. So Satyagraha is a way of resistance for those who have committed themselves, whose lives are committed and grounded in that ultimate truth. So because he felt also that for him, truth and these twin terms, truth and ahimsa, satya and ahimsa, truth and non-violence were inseparable. Right? Truth and non-violence were inseparable. The way to truth was non-violence. As far as the larger Hindu tradition is concerned, it is clearly, there's undoubted, if you look at Hindu sacred texts and you look at, what we call Hindu ethics, the Dharma Shastras, we see the cardinal place that ahimsa or non-violence occupies. And there are many reasons why he was such a strong advocate for non-violence. We can talk about it. For example, he felt that violence produces results. He didn't deny that, but they're short-lived. He would argue also that violence doesn't change the heart of the person that you are opposed to, and he wanted to change not only to get the person's behavior to change, but he wanted to transform the person, and felt that transformation could only be done by love and non-violence. But while non-injury thus has a cardinal place in the ethical spectrum of Hinduism, it is not also true that the Hindu tradition as a whole has not conceived the idea of the use of violence in pursuit of justice. There is also, in the Hindu tradition, we can easily find arguments for what today we'll speak of as a just war. Gandhi was an exceptional person in that sense. For him, there was one way only to struggle, which is the way of non-violence. Although he made some exceptions, but in the larger Hindu tradition, I think that Pitya is more complex than only ahimsa. Because his reading, the Bhagavad Gita, on which he wrote a commentary, and which was, such an important resource for him, is embedded in a larger text. And that text is the Mahabharata. It is the great war text. And that text is a text about a struggle for justice that involved a violent struggle. And as there we find all the arguments, traditional arguments that are given for a certain use of violence. So I think we have to see, if you wanted the larger Hindu picture, you'd have to also take that into consideration. But he, the radical ways in which he prioritized non-violence, and people have, given a lot of thought and study. Hinduism was a strong influence on him. So was Jesus, especially Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, turning the cheek, he wrote and spoke a lot about that. But he was deeply influenced by Jainism, by the Jaina tradition in India. Which, if you are not familiar, and he was born in the state of Gujarat, which is a stronghold of Jainism. And religious culture in Gujarat is very deeply influenced by Jain teaching and by Jain practice. And among the religions of India, the Jains are the most radical in their understanding of and practice of ahimsa, especially Jain monasticism, Jain monks. I can't think of any monastic community. And if a Jain monk walked into this room, and if you even today you see them doing, walked into this room and wanted to sit on this chair, they all carry, I give you just as an example, they all carry a very soft broom, whisk broom. And so they will very gently dust this chair and dust the space in front of the chair to make sure that no tiny insects or no worms or whatever ant is there, so that they wouldn't step on it or hurt. They go to the most extreme lengths. They will not light fires because fires attract, on evenings, fires attract insects. They're very diligent in the diet that they follow. So that even though Jains are vegetarians, yet they are very different from Hindu vegetarians in that among plants, they would not eat potatoes, for example. Why? Because you have to pull the plant out of the ground, and then when you do that, you are disrupting the community of living beings, on the earth. So these kinds of teachings, radical ahimsa, played a strong role, and ahimsa for them is absolute, for Jains. They don't make. So they argued. There are some decisions Gandhi made where the Jains differed from him. Like once he would argue that, a dog suffering from rabies should be put down. And that argument, he wrote about it. The Jains said no. They differed from him, even on those kinds of issues. And in India, the Jain community is well known for establishing and supporting very animal refuge places where unwanted animals can be kept and allowed to live out their natural life. So Jainism played a very strong role in Gandhi's commitment to ahimsa, and I would say also in his asceticism, his very ascetic understanding of religious life. I think some of those influences came more from the Jain tradition. The only guru he acknowledged in his life was a Jain teacher, with whom he corresponded when he went to England to study law, and he was encountering Christianity, and he was struggling with religions, and he entered into this long conversation with this Jain teacher, not a Hindu teacher. He turned to a Jain teacher. I'm not saying he was Jain. I'm just saying that Jainism played a very significant role, and which may explain some of his asceticism. In the Hindu tradition, one's obligations and even one's ethical obligations are determined by many factors, but they're also determined by what we speak of as stages in life. What stage in life you are in. So life is organized in four great stages. The student stage, what is called the second stage is a householder, which is the stage of marriage, of family rearing, of professional development. Then there is a sort of a semi-retired state, which is called a forest-dwelling stage, where there's more attentiveness to contemplation and spiritual growth and development. And finally, there is the last stage is the stage of renunciation, which is called sannyasa. So those who have entered that stage will have the prefix, usually have the prefixes that you are familiar with, Swami before the name. They have entered into the fourth stage. So, if you have entered into that fourth stage, there are certain vows that you take. And one of the vows is called in Sanskrit abhayam, fearlessness, that you announce to the world that you have nothing to fear from me. I give you, everyone, my protection. You have nothing to fear from me. So, for one who has entered into that stage, resistance is not allowed, even for the one who's like Gandhi was saying. But if you are a householder in a family setting, you're not expected not to resist if someone is, example, hurting your family or being violent. In fact, you have an obligation to resist. That is not considered to be, against the ethics of the Hindu. So it depends on the stages. What is interesting about Gandhi, and I think some of the problems come about that, is that although he was never a monk, but at least de jure, de facto, he was seeking to live the life of a Hindu monastic. But bringing the monastic ethics into the life of the householder, which is very difficult. Because, he would, as you see in your reading, you say, you must give no thought for tomorrow. You must not keep anything more than what you need for today and so on. That's the life of the monk, the wandering monk, who moves from place to place, and doesn't have possessions to move with except a begging bowl like a Buddhism. But to impose those ethics on the householder, the wider Hindu tradition would say, that's inappropriate. The ethical requirements are different. I think those tensions come about in so many ways in his writings. He's challenging us to think about, how we could incorporate nonviolence more and more into our lives. But I think it's important to go back to the tradition's distinction between what might be expected of a monk and what might be expected of a person in a family setting. If a monk did something resistance, that people would say, what kind of monk is this person? But no one would question if a father or mother defended his or her child. You expect it to. Thank you for a lovely conversation and for such a warm and hospitable atmosphere for me to speak to you. I am grateful.